I apologize. I had with me all the documents for tonight, and now I'm what to do.
Would you like me to read the?
I'll get it. If I can't find it in 2 seconds, then I'm gonna say yes. If you don't mind, I'm sorry about that.
I can read it really fast. Speed right through it.
We've all gotten pretty good at that. Hey, Brian, I have what you sent me on the front of the agenda. Is that the only one we have? Or is there another one? I wish I could hear you, Brian, but I can't.
That is the agenda that we have.
Right. I'm talking about the notice at the beginning of the meeting. Is this the front of that? Is that what we use? Is that what we use?
Yep. Yes.
Okay, here we go. Good evening. Welcome everybody to our Finance Committee, Concord City Council. Due to the COVID-19 coronavirus crisis, in accordance with Governor Sununu's emergency order number 12, pursuant to Executive Order 2020-04, the Finance Committee is authorized to meet electronically. City of Concord will be utilizing the Zoom platform for this electronic meeting. Please note there is no physical location to observe and listen contemporaneously to the meeting, which was authorized pursuant to Governor Sununu's emergency order number 12, pursuant to Executive Order 2020-04. All members of the Finance Committee have the ability to communicate contemporaneously during this meeting throughout the Zoom platform, and the public has access to contemporaneously listen and, if necessary, participate in this meeting by following the link below or dialing the number below and entering the ID number at the prompt. For those who want to provide public testimony at the public hearing portion of the meeting and you are connected to the Zoom website, you may click on the raise hand icon in the attendee section of Zoom. Make requests. When that time is appropriate, you'll be recognized. You must provide your testimony. For those calling who want to provide public testimony, dial *9 to alert and host that you wish to speak. The host will unmute you at appropriate time during the public meeting portion of the meeting. All participants, please keep your phones and computers on mute unless speaking. Mr. Manager, do we actually have a public testimony portion of the meeting tonight? Right.
Not at this meeting. You have one on the.
You just use the same verbiage every time?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I'm reading about a public hearing, and I'm like, well, we don't have one. So.
Oh no, there's no. But I think if there are people online and you want to be able to take their input while they're here, they could. But the public hearings are really scheduled for the 3rd and the 7th.
Okay. Perfect. Before we begin, does anybody have anything you want to share or any concerns? Okay. Ms. LeBrun, you want to call the roll, please?
I'd be glad to. Councilor Bouchard.
Here, home alone, present.
Mayor Boulay.
Here in my office.
Mayor Boulay.
Here in my office alone.
Councilor Champlin.
Present in a room in my house by myself.
Councilor Fennessy.
I am present. I am at my house, and amazingly enough, I'm by myself.
Councilor Grady Sexton.
I am present. I'm at home with my family.
Councilor Keach. Councilor Kennison.
I'm at home alone, present.
Councilor Kretovic.
Here in my home with my family.
Councilor Mattson.
I'm home alone, present.
Councilor Nyan.
Present at home and alone.
Councilor Pierce.
Present, home alone in my office.
Councilor Rice Hawkins.
Present, home alone in this room.
Councilor Todd.
Here, home, and alone in this room.
Councilor Warner.
Present, here at home with my family.
One absent, Your Honor.
Thank you. Good to see you. Just a quick review. We have general government, police, fire, and general services tonight. Mr. Manager, we'll start with general government.
You are members of the council, you want to go to item number 4, agenda item number 4, and you want to start on page 60. So 60. Give you a second to get there. You see there's no revenues budgeted in either fiscal year 21 or fiscal year 22. And I'll go through a little bit in detail this one just so you can see how so you recall how they all work. They're all pretty much the same in terms of when you see that there's more activity in the revised budget than there has been in the past. So I'll just go over those, what those mean. So when you look at them in the other budgets, you'll understand how it plays out. So for example, in the revised budget, you're going to see under other revenue, $4,500. And that is revenue from the New Hampshire Preservation Alliance in conjunction with the contract for the gas holder building. So that was, you don't get that a lot. So that's where that money, when it came in, was put in here as an other revenue. And then when we're done with the budget, it'll end up as, you'll also see it in the projected column. There's $3,416 in the gopher reimbursement. That was, you see that throughout the budget presentation. You're going to see that in many of the departments. And a fiscal year 21 revenue or revised budget from other government agencies, state, and no original budget. So you can see under the adopted budget, there was 0 for all those numbers, and then you can see it comes in under the revised, and then you see it in the projected. The $65,500, there's several parts to that. $30,000 is annually appropriated from surplus report for training and education. So you remember over the this year and next year, last year, in the previous year, we've had to cut a lot of the training dollars because the budgets are so tight. And what we've been doing is consolidating them here and then doling them out as needed for each department. There's still some in varying departments, particularly public safety, but for many of the other departments, it's been eliminated. So that's one of the things we'll have to build back in future years. But so that's the 30 part of that 65.5, 30,000 is training, 20,000 is from the Economic Development Reserve. That if we were going to start the ICMA fellow before July 1st, well, that isn't going to happen. They're going to start the first week of July. So that 20,000 of that was in the revised budget, but it won't be spent. And 15,500 is for the Economic Development Reserve for the remainder of the gas holder building contract. So you can see how that 65.5 was made up. The expenses budget to budget are up $107,500, 95,000. So the vast majority of those dollars due to the ICMA management fellow position now being budgeted in the city manager's office. And you'll see also a reduction of 170,000 in community development overall for the economic development position. So that's the trade-off. So it's significantly less, but it's now appearing here instead of community development. The remainder of the increase is due to wage and benefit increases, so that the small amount differential. This is also a good time for me to note that in virtually every budget, you will see that fringe benefits are up substantially, mainly due to the Hampshire retirement system's substantial increase in their rates. So you're going to see that in the benefits piece as we go through all of the elements of the budget. And I'm not going to harp on that, but as I stated earlier, that overall increase is $1.2 million. So the suggested or proposed tax rate increase would actually net less than that $1.2 million. So that's really what we're facing as part of this budget issues here. Excuse me. The next department to look at is on page 63, and that would be the legal department.
Tell you what, before we go to legal, let's see the questions regarding the manager's budget. Does anybody have any questions? Well, I have one. How's that? You may or may not have the answer, but you talk about the making sure we're implementing the varied and detailed COVID-19 reporting or reopening strategies for all the department units. I don't expect a full answer, but could you make any comment regarding kind of the reopening of City Hall or where you are in that thought process?
Sure. The City Hall's been open all along. People can come and go anytime they want. They just need to check in with the greeter downstairs. Been able to go to collections in the clerk's office and every other office. They've needed to wear a mask. And actually,
let me try the question again.
I'm sorry.
Let me try the question again. When do you anticipate reopening City Hall like it was prior to having a greeter?
Once the City Council makes a decision on the mask ordinance.
Okay, got it.
But I think it should be noted that we're a lot of different businesses. So, for example, the situation that will be here will be different than the situation that will be over in the citywide community center because of CDC recommendations for large groups of children being together and adults, and we have seniors over there. So we're going to have a little bit different situation throughout the city, but overall, I think come June, things will be pretty much back to normal before they were pre-COVID.
Okay, that was helpful. Thank you, Councilor Bouchard.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. City Manager, could you talk a little bit more about the training, the $30,000? Is that just an overall city employee training for work safety, or what is the training?
It would be, that training would be for any type of training. So let's say we had an individual who we wanted to get more education credits and work on their degree. So they would make application through the department into my office. I'd review it and make a determination of whether or not the courses they're taking are good for the city, but also would help them move forward with their degree. It could be some positions require different certifications you've heard about this in other organizations, to be able to do the job that they need to do. So because we, as a budget saving measure over the last couple of years, we've cut most of that money out of all the departments, but we didn't want to eliminate those important certifications or training. We essentially put most of the money in this line item. And then what you've been doing over the years or the last few years, when you have surpluses, you allocate money for training, and then we pull the money out of that training. But it gives me a greater sense of control that every dollar is being spent as wisely as possible for people to get that training and certifications. And that is throughout the entire organization.
So it's more follow-up, Mr. Mayor. So it's more employees' self-improvement and education, and not like staff training on diversity, things like that.
If we wanted to do something for that, we would take it out of there too. But you can see if you were going to do a large-scale class with a lot of folks, that amount of money is not going to get you very far. When you think about, you'd have to do it multiple sites, multiple times, unless you're doing something like an online program or a CAN program or that. But it could also be used for that, but in smaller increments.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone else? Okay, legal.
So legal is on page 63. And budget to budget revenues are up $1,400. This is due to a 2% increase in the fee charge to other communities for the prosecutorial services we provide them. As you all know, we provide services to Bow, Dumbarton, and Loudoun, and we have for years. That's where you can see that revenue. So for expenses, budget to budget are down $80,100 or 5.9%. And while wages and benefits are up for current employees, reduced funding for one of the assistant prosecutors, which saves $131,000. And I plan to review that position again in the coming fiscal year during the year. They've had a number of changes in legal over the last year, combination of the courts being closed most of the time and not producing much of anything really. And now that's created a backlog. We had 3 of the assistant city prosecutors leave. One was elected to a position, one moved to another position, and one changed to another job due to really family circumstances, but it worked out well for that person. So we've backfilled 2 of those positions so far, and with good results. And the question was, what the plan, and I've talked to City Council about this in the past, was that when we had a 3rd position that was open, we look and determine whether or not we could use that knowledge, firepower, so to speak, in the civil side, up at working with the city solicitor and the assistant city solicitor. And that's what I would have wanted to do. But because of the budget crunch and because of the retirement cost impacts, I'm suggesting we keep that position open, unless you would like to fill it, of course. And then we supplement that with outside services as we need to. And so it won't be a full savings of the dollars, but it will be some savings of the dollars. And then we see how that works. And then if it isn't working, then we take other measures during the year. But it's a way to, the budget is that tight. We have to start looking at these high-end type of positions and determine whether or not we can save some dollars. Be glad to answer any questions.
Councilor Fennessy.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. So just a point of clarification, the position that you're speaking of, was that the one that we just approved changing to kind of a split between the civil and the criminal? I think it was a couple of months ago.
That's correct. And we went out to try to find that person who could fit that, or somebody who could fit part of that and train the other person. That so far that animal doesn't exist, and we haven't been able to find somebody with the right aptitude and interest to do that. It's not that we want to abandon it right now, completely, but trying to walk the line between we need more assistance up in the civil side, but we still need some assistance on the prosecutorial side. But this isn't a time to add another attorney into the process or into the cost. So this is the approach that we decided to take.
Quick follow-up.
Sure.
You mentioned, Mr. Manager, that you anticipated that you may need to purchase some services to fill. Are you anticipating that would be on the criminal piece of that or the civil side?
The civil side.
Thank you.
Okay. Councilor Credit.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. City Manager, when you say that we have a fellow that's going to earn $95,000, we're eliminating an economic development director position at $170,000, and also someone in the city solicitor's office at $131,000. Those are not the actual salaries, correct? Those are the salaries plus taxation. So it's the out-of-pocket expense for us as the employer, so to speak, but not really what the salary base is for those positions.
That's correct. It's all the costs built into that. That nowhere near represents the salary. That's all the retirement costs. That's all the health insurance benefits costs. That's in some aspects, some operational costs too.
Awesome. Thank you.
Along the lines of outside services, last year we appropriated, I think, about $34,000 for outside services. And this year you've appropriated about the same amount. But you said you indicated you maybe need to go outside. So is that the right number, 34,000?
It is to make the budget work.
Did we use it last year?
Yes, I'm sure. Yes, we used it last year, and I would anticipate using more this year. But it really depends on the type of issues and projects that come along. So if we find that we need to bring somebody in for specialty, and particularly on the civil side, and we don't feel we have that specialty in-house, or we believe that there is somebody, give you an example, if we have a large abatement case that we want to deal with. Now, we can pay for that out of something like that out of the overlay budget if we need to, and we do sometimes, and many times. But there's other things where we might have an environmental issue that we want to have an environmental expert dealing with that. and be able to, so that Jim Kennedy or Danielle could pick up the phone, call somebody, talk to them, and it might cost us, several times. It might cost us a couple $1,000s, but it's better to bounce those ideas and have some thoughts off that than try to figure it out on their own.
I was simply trying to ask if 34,000 was enough.
There's no simple answer. No simple answers to your questions.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay. I think that takes us to assessing.
So for assessing, you will want to be on page 66. And the revenues, budget to budget, are down $99,000 or 12.2%. And that's due to a reduction in several pilot agreements. So this is really the COVID impact that you see on many of these agencies that pay us pilots. In their minds, they can't quite afford to pay what they paid in the past. So the center at Triangle Park, Havenwood Heritage Heights, Vance Street Project, and Fellowship Housing, just those four. There's also a reduction of the payment in lieu of taxes, I should say, pilots. Reduction for the Great Estate Management Resources, or GSMR, and other pilot agreements. And some pilot agreements have increased in small amounts as they've been able to. The folks have been really good to work with, but and many of these have told us, they're going to have to revisit this next year and see if they would like to get their numbers back up, but they can't do it this year because of the impacts of COVID. Expenses budget to budget are up $47,000 or 7%, and that's really due to wage and benefit changes, for contracts, and a substantial increase in the retirement system costs. I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Last question on assessing. Okay, that takes us to human resources.
You want to be on page 69. And revenues budget to budget are flat here, as you can see. And expenses budget to budget are up $36,700 or 6.3%. And that's really just due to the wage improvements or additions that you've approved in the past, and the retirement cost increases, and no other changes.
Anyone? Questions? I have two. I have Councilor Kretovic and Councilor Jim.
Thank you, Your Honor. I just wanted to mention for the Human Resources Department, it's great to see that we're finally using our ERP system in order to do our benefits enrollment, life change events, and that we're moving into performance evaluations and other items there. I think it was a long-term goal of the City Council as well as the administration to start utilizing that to really get a paper-based system for our human resources and employee engagement. And I'm glad to see we're moving in a good direction. Thanks.
Thank you.
Councilor Chamberlain?
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Spill, could you just briefly outline the goal number 5 that's indicated on page 69, the diversity, equity, and inclusion training that's planned?
Sure. So actually, there's a series of programs planned. There's one, funny say that we had one, Jen Johnson, the HR director, sent one across my desk today for a program to do for a month-long program, as a matter of fact. So this would be, again, go back to the training dollars that we talked about. And so this would be for, and obviously there's some outside service dollars, to be able to do training throughout the organization, but it'd be tailor-made for the departments and different agencies or different businesses that we have to put together the training for this. Jen has been involved in many organizations around the state and in the city. So she's going to head this up for us for the entire city organization, working with several of us, as a matter of fact. Give you an example, Janice Bonifat is also signing up for many of these too, because she deals directly with the public. And that's what we're trying to do, is people who deal directly with the public, but also all our public safety agencies and general services will all be part of this going forward.
Follow up, Your Honor?
Please.
Thanks. Mr. Spell, are these programs going to be initiated by the individual departments, or are they going to be initiated at the human resources level and coordinated with departments?
At the human resources level and coordinated with the departments.
Excellent. Sounds good. Thanks very much. Thank you, Your Honor.
Anyone else have any questions? Mr. Mayor, what's the difference under your budget for the employee recognition day and pins, et cetera, and the recognition program? Is there a difference? You just split it into two places.
The recognition program are the resources that we make available for essentially reward programs and for recognition for, so for example, people who do above and beyond work, and we have small rewards that we give folks, and particularly during the COVID situation. The one that's, and I'm going to scan back because I don't have it right in front of me. The one for the city managers is we buy the pins. So these are the service pins. So keep mine right with me. This is, what year is this? I can't read it. This is my 15-year pin, but I have a 20-year pin too, so I have a collection. So Sue Stevens buys the pins. We keep them here physically.
Okay. Anybody else have anything? Okay. That takes us to finance.
So for finance, you want to be on page 72. And on page 72, you see revenues budget to budget are up 1.2 million or 2.2%. You can see property tax revenue is the main driver here. And that's the tax revenue raised for property taxes 1.5 million compared to the revised budget. And this is due to the 2.5% tax increase and new tax revenues be raised based on real growth in assessed valuations. So this is just real growth, not market growth. The use of fund balance is up $250,000, as I had presented earlier. We also note that other government and government agencies in the state is down $749,727. And that's, you recall, in fiscal year 21 was the second year for the one time, so to speak, state highway revenue allocation. Remember the state sent dollars which we used on road improvements. So those were one-time funds. So those are not coming our way this year. So there's a reduction of about $750,000 there. You also notice that the investment income is down $345,000, and the highway block grant is down $50,200. We've budgeted both the meals and rooms and the highway block grant the same as we actually received in fiscal year 21. And we generally don't find out those actual amounts until sometime late summer, early fall. So we're just going to base those on estimates right now. And expenses budget to budget are up $132,100 due to the changes in the retirement system costs and wages and benefits. Be glad to answer any questions.
Who has questions on finance? Councilor Fennessy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Question for the city manager. You mentioned that the projected property tax revenue included some increase in the anticipated real growth. And I just wanted to check and see what that number was. And is the assumption that the assessed values would stay the same? Obviously, that could change. But in building the budget, do you build it off of the prior year's assessed values?
We build it off essentially the ability to use the additional dollars through a new growth, or is, we estimated, and Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, we estimated about 40 million in this one, and the last time we checked, it was already at 39.7 or something like that $1 million. So we're right on target. So that is what's generated from we build that in. So that's the new growth that has occurred, which generates new revenue. What changes in the market is simply, back and forth between values of commercial, residential, neighborhood to neighborhood. That doesn't net us any new dollars. That just redistributes, as you know, Council, that just redistributes the pie in terms of what people pay. So it's really the new growth that we calculate, have to estimate on in terms of generating a new revenue, and then of course whatever the tax rate increase is. Did that handle your question, or?
It did, yes. So for someone who's not as well versed, my understanding of what you're saying is for a single family house that was on the rolls last year, you're not anticipating any change in the value for purposes of setting the rate, but you aren't taking into account any increased new property that comes on the rolls that would have an impact.
I think probably the way to look at it is, right, so if a new home was built next to your home, that new home would be obviously paying a much higher tax rate because there wasn't a home there before, that property. But generally what happens is people's value change relative to each other based on the type of home, the neighborhood they live in, and then of course residential changes amongst classification, whether it's a manufactured housing unit versus a condo versus single family. They all change at different rates. And then of course residential changes and it varies to commercial. So residential is probably going up, if you had to use a gross number, 1 to 1.1% a month for the last 2 years, while commercial has probably gone down in many places. So you'll see a shift. And that's what the mayor and the council have been concerned about in the past, is you'll see a shift away from additional tax burden being put on residential and away from the commercial market. So that's what you got to be careful with. Which is one of the reasons we did the 0% tax rate increase last year, because we were concerned about what would happen. So hope that doesn't muddy things a little, but that's how it works.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Councilor Krivik.
Your Honor, Mr. City Manager, on this particular page for the finance, we're looking at the compensation and we're seeing about a $14,000 increase from 2021 to 2022. But then on the fringe benefit line, that's about a $54,000 difference between 21 and 22. And last Thursday, when we were having a conversation, you spoke very eloquently about what the retirement plan benefits and the impact coming from the state are going to be. Well, this is probably a small example of what we're looking at. This is what we're looking at, correct? That we're seeing small increases in compensation for our employees, yet large increases in compensation in the fringe benefits because of this that is coming down in the retirement system. And as we get further in the budget, we're going to see more of that when we get to fire and police and other departments. Am I reading that correctly? And is that how our residents at home should be looking at that also? Compensation is small, fringe benefits is large.
That's exactly right. So keeping in mind the overall average 20% increase in the retirement system costs, which I should note, the employees don't see any additional dollars from that. That just goes into the system based on the state's management or the retirement system management of that. And you'll recall we started off with I think it was about an 8.9% increase in health benefit costs. And staff, really Brian and Jen Johnson and others, were able to negotiate that down to 3%, which was very good in this market. A lot of that had to do with you moving the employees to a high deductible health insurance plan, which is the reason you're seeing much of any increase in the wages, because there was a change in the benefits, and then you're starting to see that now pay off in the benefits. So you have that exactly right, Council.
Councilor Kinnison.
Thank you, Your Honor. My question, Mr. City Manager, is around the projected property tax revenue for 2022. Is within that projection, does it take into consideration a property tax increase this year?
Yes, it does.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Councilor Fennessy.
It's okay. Actually, I don't have a question, but I just noticed it looks like Councilor Keach is under the attendees, so maybe somebody could move into the meeting.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I had one question. I noticed I've seen a few of the CAFRs and the audits over the years, and I believe we're in the fifth year of, or the last year of our contract with our folks, our auditing services. Will we go out to RFP to do that?
I can answer that, Mr. Manager. We will take a look at that and make a determination if that's in the best interest of the city to go out for RFP, or if it makes sense to extend the agreement that we have with them again. So
why help me understand, why would we not want to see what the market bears? I mean, we've had $52,000 for a report where, you know, they tell you do a good job. I mean, you get a lot of credit. You do a lot of the work. This is no fault of yours. I mean, I'm trying to understand why you would not put this out to bid.
And we likely will, Mr. Mayor. So that will be the plan, to actually go out to bid and see what the market is out there.
Okay, thanks. Council Pierce, sorry, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. City Manager, going back to the fringe benefits line, if I missed this, I apologize. There's about a $25,000 increase from the projected, from the revised to the projected. Is that a timing issue?
That's since Brian's up and this is his department, I'll let him handle that.
Okay.
That is probably as much to do with just some changes in staffing, and when we have a new person that comes on board, if they have a family health insurance plan for the new person, and if the person who left had a single or a two-person, it's those types of changes that actually make the big difference there.
Okay, thank you.
What else for questions? Okay, Mr. Manager, how about information technology?
We want to go to page 75. So there's no revenue budgeted for fiscal year 22. Expenses budget to budget are up $128,300 or 12.5%. 75,000 of this is increase in a new help desk position. So when I looked at the budget, this is something I wanted to do for a couple of years. I couldn't do it last year with 0%. This year, I thought, based on our experience with COVID, people working remotely, all the different, just this, what we're doing right now, and the support of all the committees, we're finding it very difficult to be able to support all the different systems, and Councilor Kretovic can put it out, stated earlier about the changes in the HR and all the different programs we're going to. We're getting much more sophisticated. We're instituting a lot of new programs with a lot of departments. It's finally coming to fruition, your vision of making these changes. But we need the support to be able to do that, and not only to support the individual applications themselves, but the people who are using them. And this is on a 24/7 basis. Remember, we've got police and fire and general services and water and wastewater operations all operating around the clock. So I found it necessary to actually add this position in, and that's where you see the vast majority of the cost increases are in that new position. Glad to answer any questions.
Councilor Fedesi.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Manager, so my question is, with respect to adding that position, how are you addressing those issues previously, and are the expenses associated with that captured in outside services, or were they captured somewhere else?
They essentially, there were no true outside expenses. What was happening was things were getting delayed. So every time the police department had a laptop and a cruiser go down, somebody working on say rebuilding a server or bringing out several new computers to the fire department for the ambulances had to stop doing that and go and work on the cruiser and get the laptop up and running again. So really what it was, what I saw it as a tremendous amount of inefficiency, existing staff necessary to keep all those emergency pieces going. And I don't just mean public safety. This is for the entire organization, but having to handle those things, and which is why this position is a help desk position in the sense that this is the type of person who would be handling all the smaller issues that draw somebody away from doing major projects and be able to put our ERP system into place and support that and be able to do the training work with people as needed. So it really, there's really no significant any services out there that we won't need anymore. This is just getting us closer to where we need to support the existing infrastructure that we have now.
Follow up, Your Honor?
Please.
This is a little bit unrelated, but in looking at the outside services number, there's a pretty big fluctuation between the adopted 2021 budget, the revised one, and then what's being projected. What's the explanation for that?
I would, if Eddie is online, Brian, can you? Or I think actually Jonathan.
Tom, I'm here. That's just that's one method that OMB has just carved out some expenses. I'd have to check with budgeting on how they've carved out that piece.
We can get back to you on that. We'll get it to you this meeting.
Thank you.
Council Chamberlain.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Spell, do you feel confident that we've allocated sufficient resources in this budget to ensure the security of our IT system and information from being hacked or from ransomware enterprises?
That's the question I ask the IT director all the time, and he says there's no guarantees. He's not going to promise anything, but he delivers, excellent results. The other position that was competing with this, if I could add two positions, I'd like to put the assistant city prosecutor back in, but it would be a network security engineer in the IT department.
Outside services.
And I asked Eddie, you're on. And I asked Eddie if the IT director which one he wants, because we need both. And he went with the help desk technician because he thought that we have the ability in some of the existing staff to be able to do the pieces that you're looking for, counselor. He's very conservative spending wise, but in this case, that was the one that would provide the greatest versatility. But we're prepared. But again, as you know, we had a system go down. Eddie and his staff and Jonathan were able to completely isolate that, rebuild the servers, and get us back up in pretty quick time without really loss of anything, other than, again, time.
Follow up, Your Honor?
Please.
Mr. Spell, do all of our staff who are regularly on the internet system, do they all receive training in defensive strategies, defensive tactics to avoid compromising the system?
We do, but we would like to do it more often, and that's why we think the help desk position would be good with that. But we do that on a regular basis, yes.
Okay, thanks very much. Thank you, Your Honor.
Councilor Matson.
Thank you, Your Honor. I just wanted to follow up on the question regarding the IT position, the help desk position. You had said 128.3, and I just wanted to back up and sort of re-ask Councilor Kretovik's question about that's not a strict rate for a salary, correct?
Oh, correct. It's dramatically less than that, but that's the entire package with all the support and really the equipment that person would need, and their benefits. We don't know. We never know what the benefit in terms of the budget in terms of benefits, because you don't know what type of situation somebody's in. So we take a midline picture sometimes, and we're usually wrong, but it balances out over the organization.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Just looking at the budget detail, it seems like the outside services, the two costs that rose significantly were the hardware maintenance as well as the software maintenance. But other than that, it seems like seems like the budget's pretty much the same as last year's. If that may or may not be the driver, I'm not sure. My question is, Mr. Manager, my annual question, and that is one of the goals in which you have this year was something that was not completed last year, and that's the converting the legacy permitting system to the new NGROV permitting systems. And one of the things you talk about was how it was the wording? It was due to lack of resources and such. So do we think we'll ever do it?
Could I have Mr. Bahia? This is when he actually volunteered to help Brian out, which doesn't happen often.
I've been asking this question since Ken Logan, so
That's right, yeah.
it was a couple of Carlos's ago.
Good evening, Your Honor, members of council. So the ERP system, not the ERP system, the permitting software system, we have just finally made the first pass in our data conversion. So we took all the legacy data that goes back to all the questions you've asked, Mayor, over the last 20 years and moved that data over. We're testing it now. So the resource issue we had is there's only one person here in the city that can do that. And they're also doing the legacy conversion for every other software introduction that we're doing at the same time. So that's a challenge, and that's a skill set that not a lot of people have. And so that's taken us several months of delay. But we see the light at the end of the tunnel now, because that was the biggest concern, is making sure we got all the data. So I see the smile coming. We are still fingers crossed that we're going to get everything done this year. In fact, the David Hall, our code administrator, has been working very hard. He's sort of the quasi departmental project manager, and we've got, I think, about 66 forms already generated in the system. And we've got the customer portal sort of ready to go as well. It's just a question of lining those two things up with the data.
I wish you luck.
All right, thank you, sir.
Anyone else? I did want to say one thing from last year that you were able to complete, and that was the citizen request tracker, the online citizens. I've gotten really positive feedback, as well as I think others have as well. So congratulations, that was a real positive. Anyone else? IT? Okay, next one should be City Council, I believe.
Correct. You want to be on page 78. Expenses budget to budget are up $3,000 or 7.7% due to an increase in council orientation expenses. You do this every other year. You set aside dollars for orientation. And also this is where you'll find there's $600 dues for the International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives is located here. It seemed like a very good program. It's something that I've wanted to do for a number of years, and I think it makes sense, but I figured I'd put it in your budget. Also notice on page 88, well, before we go on to that, that's something else. I could stop there, take any questions.
No, go ahead and finish.
Okay, on page 88 and 89 is information on, you've asked for this to be included, and we started doing it recently, of all the boards and commissions and all the number of members who volunteer to be on those boards and commissions. And you can see there are a total of 53, and the same number as last year. And if you go back, though, I think a dozen or so years, it used to be in the 70s. So I think you've done some consolidation over the years. But there's plenty of ways to participate if people are interested. Glad to answer any questions.
Anyone have any questions about our budget? Okay. Takes us to City Clerk's budget.
So for City Clerk's budget, you want to be on page 91. And on page 91, revenues budget to budget are down $3,000. or 3.3%, mainly due to a decrease in school district payments. And remember, they reimburse the city, they reimburse the city clerk's office for election costs, some of the election costs. And the expenses budget to budget are down $10,000 or 2%. And this is due to a reduction in wage and benefit expenses due to the reduction in part-time election wages of when, and we pay all the employees, the part-time employees that we put together for that. So you see that reduction there.
Any questions regarding the clerk's budget? Okay, that takes us to general overhead, I believe.
So you want to be on page 93. So general overhead, budget to budget revenues are up $188,000 or 4.5%. This is due to an increase of $98,000 for impact fees towards the cost of debt service for regional drive debt. So we're almost getting finished paying for regional drive. So we have impact fees that were generated there. So we're using the impact fees to keep the tax rate down there. There's a $16,700 additional transfer in from the water fund, a $15,900 transfer into the wastewater fund. So these are costs incurred by the general fund for those funds, and these funds essentially reimburse for those costs. There's $12,600 additional funds from a cable TV franchise fee, and there's a $40,000 increase from trust transfers. I'll be glad to answer any questions.
We'll ask questions. Councilor Creditor.
Your Honor, Mr. City Manager, with regards to the transfer fees, specifically the impact fee, when there is construction in an area and there are heavy vehicles on a roadway and it is causing some damage to the roadway, is that the fund that helps repair the roadway afterwards, or do some of the asphalt fill that has to be done on that road because of damage that's happened because of those heavier trucks on a road that honestly couldn't manage the heavier vehicles on it?
I'll answer the first part, and maybe Carlos can jump in for the second part. The first part of this is the impact fees are fees that are generated really at the planning board level when a project comes in that is going to generate a increase in, say, there's recreation dollars is an example, and those dollars can only be used in certain areas and for certain types of capital one-time expenses to improve capital facilities. So for places where there's impacts due to construction itself, I'll let Carlos, if you wouldn't mind answering that question.
So with some of our major projects, we'll have a performance bond, for example, that will hold on the construction project. And if at the end of the day, if there's an issue that we can't resolve amicably, when I say amicably, through an enforcement action, basically saying, look, you caused this damage to the site because of your construction vehicle, so you need to correct that before we'll issue a CO for the site. And if there's a dispute there, we can pull the bond. We try not to do that because that's sort of the last resort. We don't really want to do that. It's more complicated for us as well. Usually the enforcement vehicle of saying, like, you're not going to be able to open will normally take care of that.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, that completes that portion. We'll move on to public safety.
Okay. Well, did you want to cover the rest? Oh, sorry, am I on? Yes.
You know what? I apologize.
Nope, we have a little bit more general overhead.
Yep, please.
Okay. So for the general, because there's many pages, as you can see, of general overhead here. There's 3 pages. So you want to be on page 94. So you can see this is part of some of the solutions to come up with for getting the tax rate down. Expenses budget to budget are down $844,000 or 6.1%. Under the transfers section, So you can see they're broken up in the bold up at the top left-hand side. The $612,400 reduction in transfer out to trust, and this is due to a few pieces. $486,000 reduction in additional highway funds. That's what I mentioned earlier about not to be received in fiscal year 22. $106,000 reduction in the city's program trust transfer for paving. I mentioned that on our first night of discussion. $20,000 reduction due to reduced budget for annual highway block grant allocation. So that is really the number we think that we'll be receiving from the state, but it's just an estimate, which is a reduction from the previous year. Also, if you compare to the revised budget of $2.8 million, that difference is due to the surplus of supplemental appropriation approved by the council each year to transfer to trust accounts for the assigned fund balance. There's a transfer to golf is down $40,600, and that's due to the strong results. And you'll see that when we get to the golf budget. In the fiscal year 21 golf fund and the revision of rates, don't anticipate the general fund, the golf fund needing any general fund support in fiscal year 22, so that helps a little bit. Transfer out to capital projects is reduced by $143,700 again, simply to save in the tax rate as part of the operating budget reductions. And under special programs, this section you'll see is overall is down $2,500. You can see that in the details on the next page, on page 95. You'll see the Concord Community Television is up $7,500 due to the projected increase. So that's their share of the increase in the cable revenue that we received. And the in-town Concord is down $10,000, consistent with the council decision that you made just recently for fiscal year 21. Under debt service, so if you go down, you want to be on page 94, back on 94. You see under debt service, principal interest is down $98,000. That's due to decisions that you made last year in anticipation of this year being a difficult year of not funding as many capital projects. That gives you a savings of this year of $98,000. Under risk and insurance, retiree health insurance is down $30,700. Under contingency, this line is down $40,000. We've kept it at about $140,000 for a number of years. Again, to keep the tax rate down, I'm suggesting you trim that down by $40,000 this year. Under comp adjustment, this line is up $151,000. I reduced this line by $300,000 last year as a part of an attrition adjustment. This year, I've budgeted this line where I believe it is most needed for attrition elements. So when we get to the police department, the Parks and Recreation Department, the General Services Department, you're going to see attrition numbers there, but not here as much. Under street lighting, this line is up $4,900. It's due to actual, this line is actually up about $18,000, but we projected $13,000 savings due to the LED street light project, which is a half a year savings. That's because the project, as members, has been delayed because of the bids, but we believe we'll be able to achieve about 6 months of savings for that. And under the Social Services Agency, so right down at the bottom, this line is down $38,000. And there's details on page 95 for each of the groups. And that is for some of the groups, the Edmund McKenna House, I'm suggesting a drop of $10,000. For the Friends Program, $20,000. For the Pennacook Community Center, $8,000. Funding for all the other agencies remain the same level fiscal year 21. And that completes the general government section. And I'll be glad to answer any questions that you have at this time.
Anyone with questions? Councilor Chapin.
Thanks, Your Honor. Mr. Espel, could you just briefly outline the rationale for the reductions, excuse me, in allocations to the social service agencies that you just
Sure.
Itemized?
Sure. And these, again, just my thoughts on the costs. I'll give you an example. The Friends Program, the first one, they served 30 families in 2020. We were able to get 4 families into their shelter. That's more than most years. Most years it's 1 or none. The reduction, the 20,000 reduction only represents about 1% of their total revenue. So you can see the reductions that we've received over the years from other folks funding the city is much greater than that. The city is the only local government that makes a contribution. This agency's received a lot of federal aid, and they have federal aid forthcoming. And as a matter of fact, the city just recently secured a grant for them for the Friends program, the amount of $83,599. So that's the Friends program. Again, you can all completely disagree and refund it or fund more, but that was just my thoughts on this year. And again, we look at each one of these year to year. For the Salvation Army and the McKenna House, that went from $31,220 to $21,220, and that's just a $10,000 reduction. They housed 88 individuals this year. We got 1 person into that shelter this year. Many years we get nobody into that shelter. So if you look at the total cost, again, look at the total cost and what the taxpayers are putting into this and what the return is. The question is there. And $10,000 is approximately the amount of the contribution that is used for occupancy. So when you look at the application, if you look at the Pennacook Community Center, that went from 28,000 to 20,000. There's no magic to that number. It was just rounding the number off. They provide services to 12 communities. They receive PPP funding from 3 CARES grants. Again, it's about 1% of their total revenue. It's really a small amount, relatively speaking. And the center was closed for much of the year, so they should have achieved some sort of savings there by not having that open. Again, this is a 1-year type of look, but this is something, these dollars have been pretty much the same for many, many years. And when the city council first looked at these social service agencies, they said directly to me, use your best judgment of what you think should be funded and what shouldn't be funded and the amounts. And that's where we are. So there's no magic to any of these numbers. I'm sure any of the groups could make an argument to have twice the amount of money that they have or 3 times the amount of money they have. You just have to look at what the direct return is for the investment and the financial situation that we're in today. I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you.
Councilor Rosanes.
Thank you. I believe we had a discussion about this last year in terms of the application process for area agencies or nonprofits to apply for these funds. Can you tell us if there was any change to how that process was done this year?
It was all done the same way. Everybody had the opportunity to if they requested an application, we sent it to them. They all submitted in writing. Looking at some of the applications, it probably doesn't make sense, for example, for the SPCA to do the same application as the Friends program, because essentially they're more of a service provider and do contracted services for us than say, the Pennacook Community Center or something like that. But each one provides a lot of detail. And it's really based off the Granite United Way application process, which is, we didn't want to create anything onerous for folks, but it does provide significant information. So that's available if anybody wants to see that.
Councilor.
Thank you, Paul. That was going to be one of my follow-up questions is if we had folks who applied outside of this and how it was advertised. And then the other question, I was going to ask this on Thursday, but if you know, I'll have you answer it now. I know last year, or I guess 2 years ago now, we had the conversation with New American Africans about using space at the community center. I wondered if you were able to speak to that tonight, if anything developed of that. Thank you.
Actually, I think David Gill could probably speak to that best I think he's online. No?
Okay, well, I'll tell you what, once you have the
I'm happy to ask Thursday.
You have the question and you'll be prepared.
I think he had planned to be here Thursday, so that's why.
In the meantime, Council Bouchard, you're there.
I did, Mr. Mayor. Before COVID, the Parks and Rec did provide space and started providing space for the, for Change for Concord to have a coffee house. And then COVID hit and that shut down, but they did, were able to arrange for Change for Concord to have a coffee house there. So there was work being done, and I believe, and I'm not sure, and David, Mr. Gill can probably answer this on Thursday, but I think they also provided space for English as a citizenship classes, I believe. But so there was an effort, and then, you know, COVID kind of stopped a lot. So.
Thank you. Any further questions regarding this section? Okay, I'm going to ask you your, how would you like to handle this? So we are not holding public hearings. We do have a public hearing scheduled for the end so that everyone gets to testify on what they wish. But there are two people in the attendee section, both of which they are from the organizations that were affected by this particular budget. So we have somebody, it appears, from the Concord Community Center, and we have somebody from the Friends program. Would you like to give them a chance to say hello, or someone ask them a question, or how do you feel?
I'd let him in.
Okay. So if you could let in Elizabeth Deaver, please. Good evening and welcome.
Good evening, Mr. City Manager, Mr. Mayor, and City of Concord councilors. Thank you for allowing me to speak tonight. My name is Elizabeth Dever, and I'm the new Executive Director for the Pennacook Community Center. First and foremost, I want to thank you for the recommended $20,000 contribution for this coming year and your continued support. The support that the city allows, the support from the city allows Pennacook Community Center to provide services to the community that otherwise would not be available, especially for our most vulnerable. On October 4th, I started my position at the Pennacook Community Center, which many of our residents fondly call the PCC. And over the past 8 months, the one thing I've learned is that the Pennacook Community Center is coming out of the pandemic stronger and more focused on community needs. When I interviewed for this position, it was very apparent the PCC board members wanted this next phase of the community center to be about getting back to its roots. They wanted the new ED to spend time understanding its residents and the needs that all the groups, ages, and families were grappling with in our local towns, especially as we maneuvered through the next stages of the pandemic. As the Pennacook Community Center spends time planning and reopening and being conscientious to details and financial responsibilities, we also are spending time establishing solid partnerships with area organizations, community businesses, and our residents. We're working hard to expand programs to the community and look forward to partnering with the City of Concord in a more fluid and diligent way on future programs and services. Each year, the City of Concord's funding helps with many of the different needs and services that we provide to our local families. The following are just a few examples that represent how we determine future programming and where the City of Concord's financial contribution helped reach and support the true needs of our area this year. When COVID-19 hit, we had to close our doors for 2 months. During that time, we reached out to families and residents and asked what the top needs were in our local area. The 3 highest categories were not surprising: childcare for working parents, senior connections, and an all-day hybrid remote model for elementary school students whose parents worked outside the homes. It became clear we needed to figure out how to reopen our childcare programs at half capacity, which also included our 2020 summer camp program that we ran. We creatively figured out how to continue to support our senior population by checking in on them and providing programs that kept them safe while they connected to friends, family, and the surrounding community. The feeling of isolation was real for this group. Last but not definitely least was the board decision to add the Monday through Friday hybrid learning model for remote learning. So we had children Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. When they weren't in school, they were with us. A renewal and rebranding of PCC is naturally occurring as we start to understand the concerns and problems in our area. For example, we've added an adventure summer camp this summer for middle school students who are in need of problem-solving skills, social emotional guidance, and time spent in nature. As we moved our thinking to the fall of next year, it became evident through this spring our elementary schools needed more structured enrichment programs in our after-school program. Along with structuring and offering new programs, the PCC leadership team is spending time evaluating the property and buildings that our programs are housed in. We're in the process of writing a 5-year maintenance master plan that will allow us to look for funding on large projects. As many of you might have known, we had the land, the Village Street land, and thinking of expansion. And me walking in October, of course, I got quickly caught up of that we were selling it, and we did sell it in December. So we are now back at really looking at our facility and what our needs are. Just before wrapping up and thanking you again for letting me speak and thank you for your recommendation, I wanted to tell you a story. I got a call the first 2 weeks of my position here from a local school district asking if we had availability for a homeless child that had just entered the school system and that they weren't able to pay. They needed a place to go before and after, and also on the days that they had to do their hybrid. Immediately talking with the school, we found scholarship funds and a transportation for the student. The student has been with us since winter and spring, and happy to say that he is signing up for our summer camp program also. So thank you so much for your support, and we greatly appreciate it. And I look forward to working closer with City of Concord.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Anybody have any questions, quick questions before we go? We do have two, apparently. Councilor Todd.
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. And Ms. Dever, thank you very much, and welcome aboard on the PCC. I think your outreach efforts are really to be commended, what I'm hearing from what you've said tonight. We certainly know there's a lot of need out there, and you've described some of it here tonight, but refining the information that you should be able to get through your outreach should enable the PCC to be even more effective. So that's really excellent. My question, given the fact that the PCC's plan apparently is to stay where you are now, is when do you expect your building and property master plan for the PCC to be completed?
I'm happy to say that I hired a maintenance individual to help me look at all the buildings and go through them. And we're hoping by the end of next year, we will have a 5-year master plan to look at each of the buildings. We have 3 buildings plus the property across from the Rolfe Park. So by the end of the year, we're hoping to have a master plan in place and be able to then look for funding to help with the larger projects.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Bouchard.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Welcome, and thank you for all you do. My questions, I was just curious, how big is your community, the areas that you serve? I know it's Pennacook, Boscawen, and out of that, how many are Concord, Pennacook residents that you're serving in your programs? What's the percentage?
And the percentage right now is different because of the COVID percentage. The majority of our participants do come from Pennacook, Boscawen, and also from the greater Manchester area. So the percentage-wise of Concord residents would probably be about the 20% to 25% when we're working with our seniors and our children and families.
Follow up, Mr. Mayor?
Please.
And can you tell me, please, would you know how much the other communities, Boscawen, I think at one point they were 5,000 a year, or is that more now? And what the other communities support?
Boscawen is being asked for 5,700, and then we only receive funding from the other town which is Webster, which is $500. And we average usually 1 or 2 families from that town.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you for your questions.
Okay, well, appreciate that. Thank you for being with us tonight. Now we have somebody from the Friends program, and it is Connor Spurn. Good evening and welcome.
Okay, hello. Sorry about that. Just first of all, thank you, Counselor and Mayor, Mr. Mayor, for allowing me to speak now prior to the public hearing. There were a few clarifications that I wanted to make, and specifically with the number of families that have come into our shelter in the past year. I'm not sure where the number of one family coming into the shelter was. We've been at capacity throughout COVID. And actually, because of COVID, we decompressed our shelter. So we had 4 families in our shelter, and we have been paying for hotel rooms for 4 of those families to stay off-site. Because of our shelter, they share bathroom spaces and kitchen spaces. So for CDC guidelines, we just could not keep 8 families in our shelter, but we have served 8 families throughout the entirety of the pandemic. The other clarification I want to make was with the reference of state funding. Actually, in 2019, we were cut over $110,000 from the state of New Hampshire with little to no warning, specifically just because of the way that they have shifted their model of how they fund shelters. So where the state is now requiring that you have to be a housing first, low barrier shelter to receive funding from the state. When you're working in a family shelter, that is not always the safest option. While we can enter people who come in with they test positive for substance use, they are required in our shelter to maintain sobriety, use of any sort of substance on the property is prohibited. And those are things that under Housing First guidelines, you cannot exit people for. So because of the way that shifted, we did transition to a Housing First setup, specifically because we could not function without any form of state funding, even at 60% of what we had been previously receiving. But that funds, not only do we provide shelter, our entire shelter program is focused around complete well-being and ensuring the longevity of being placed in housing. So families don't just come to us because they don't have housing. They go through an entire case management process that ensures that when they exit our shelter into their own housing, they're able to maintain that housing, which ends the cycle of homelessness, not only for the family, the parents, but also for the children as well. And so the concern I have is that when we're receiving funding cuts from the city at $20,000 is a lot of money for us. And where COVID, we have had families this entire time, but part of the problem with our turnover is that we've had families who are ready to exit that just cannot find apartments. So the housing shortage in Concord has contributed to the lower turnovers because of COVID, in addition to the housing and eviction moratorium. So people aren't moving out of their apartments, people aren't being evicted. Again, so lower income housing is just not available. And housing isn't affordable even with subsidies. And in addition to the work that we normally do with our families because of COVID, we provided continuum of care to previous families that had resided within our shelter. 56 of those families we had direct contact with and connected them with supports, whether that be through Granite United Way, state and local welfare, to maintain our housing. So again, in addition to providing housing throughout the entirety of COVID-19, we continue to support people in their homes, which overall reduces the cost on the city and state authorities with the cost of just having people living on the streets, essentially. And I know anybody on the city council understands the cost of repeated calls to emergency services or uninsured hospital stays, and especially with children in the mix, that number racks up quite quickly. So I just would like to make the argument that, again, the lower numbers are not because of any less work being done. If anything, it was more work, and we just have extenuating circumstances that have never been anything we've experienced. And in the long term, we anticipate the need for family emergency housing to increase, so much so that we're actually in the middle of expanding to allow us to be able to house 9 families instead of 8, especially as, again, in the end of June with the eviction moratoriums expiring, we're anticipating to see an increase in that need. Our family shelter is the only family shelter within Merrimack County. So again, this is not something where they could go to another shelter with their children. this is sometimes the only option that they have.
Thank you very much. We have a question from Councilor Grady Sexton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Ms. Byrne, for your overview as well as for all the work that you're doing in the community. You referenced that most recently you've been serving 8 families. Can you tell me how many of those families originated from the city of Concord?
Sure. So I can tell you in the last fiscal year, we housed 38 families, of which I believe 15 or 16 of those families were directly from Merrimack County. And then the continuum of care. I don't have an exact number on the number of the families that were residing within Merrimack County, but a majority of our family, the people who exit our family shelter, most oftentimes end up in Keystone Management Apartments. So majority of those families that have exited are residing within Merrimack County.
Further question?
Yes, follow up. Thank you. Is it possible to get a report back about the number of families that actually originated from the city of Concord itself?
Yes. So that was what I was referring to of the 36 families or 35 families. 15 of them were from Merrimack County.
Ms. Byrne, I think the question is how many are from Concord?
Oh, I apologize. Yes, I could absolutely get a report from that. Our shelter manager keeps quite detailed records of all of the families that enter and exit. So I would be happy to provide that report to the council.
Yeah.
Anyone else have any questions? Ms. Byrne, what's a typical length of stay for a family?
In a non-COVID year, usually the average stay for a family is anywhere from 2 to 3 months. Because of COVID, we've had families that have been ready to exit for almost 6 months now. I think the longest stay in the history of anyone staying in our shelter was 10 months. And that was because of extenuating circumstances within their situation, and it involves reconciliation with children. So that was an abnormal case, but most times 3 months.
Thank you. Anyone else have any further questions? Mr. Manager?
So I just wanted the numbers. I'll go over the numbers again that I had stated earlier, so council can, I maybe did them too fast. So for the Friends program, they this is really just from the individual applications. They served 30 families in 2020. That's total. In the city staff, we were able to get 4 families into the shelter, which is much more than what you usually get. So that's a good sign. And the city is the only one of organization or government organization that contributes to the Friends program. In the past years, we've gotten either no people or maybe one family and or no families into it. It's this Salvation Army one that they house 88 individuals, and we were able to get 1 person in this past year. In most years, we don't get anybody. So those were the numbers, and all those numbers. You're welcome. Those numbers, they come from the applications. So of course, I think the 2020, what Connor's probably talking to, I'm not going to put word. She's looking at the numbers too, and where people come from is really what they're telling you they come from, at least from what we have. So once people come from Concord, we just consider them Concord people going through there. So. So she's correct in a lot of that and all of that.
So if I could, I'm just curious to follow up on one thing the manager said. So there are 27 communities within Merrimack County. Ms. Byrne, is it true that Concord is the only community of those 27 in Merrimack County which actually financially support this organization?
I believe so, yes. Directly from the city. There are some sub-grant groups that we receive that are either private organizations or grants that.
No, I'm only focusing on the governmental agencies. So has anybody ever asked Franklin or Bosquen or Andover?
Yes, actually. Many times what we find is that either we only receive 1 or 2 families, maybe from one community, and it's not always regular. I would say a majority of the families that come from Merrimack County, I would say most likely do come from Concord. And again, I can confirm that with our shelter director. And I can give you that official number.
But we're the only of the 27 communities that actually financially support your organization.
Yes.
Just so you know, I've spoken to previous executive directors, and they have asked other communities for help.
Council Manson.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. You asked the question that I wanted to ask. So I'm all good. Thank you.
We have Council Kingston.
I'm wondering if anyone has approached Merrimack County, since there are families from throughout the county in your shelter for funding.
Yes, ma'am. Actually, we receive, I believe, $36,000 from the County of Merrimack for shelter funding.
Thank you to Commissioner Reed. Put in my personal plug. Okay, seeing no further questions, thank you very much. Appreciate you spending time with us this evening.
Thank you. And I appreciate it again for allowing me to speak early.
Okay, that allows us to move on, and I believe we're now completed that portion. We now can go to public safety. Mr. Manager, would you like to talk about police?
Yes, Your Honor. So you want to go to attachment number 5, police. And you want to be on page 100. There's really not many changes here. Revenues budget to budget are down $72,000 or 10.2%. And these parking penalties are down $20,000. Special duty services are down $60,000. So think of special duty services as when officers are hired for road work because of construction or something else going on. Of course, because of COVID, there's been a lot of impacts, but also keep in mind, Liberty Utilities was required over the last several years, I think 4 years, to make a lot of improvements to the service lines that were really decrepit, and have made a lot of those improvements. So there's less and less work out there on the street that needs to get done. Cruiser rental fees down $5,000. Police witness fees are down $6,000. So you may recall in previous years and over many years, decades, the state has reimbursed local communities for witness fees for their police officers to go to court. And in a cost-saving measure by the state, they decided, of course, they're not paying those fees anymore to anybody. So just another death by 1,000 cuts. This is 6,000. This used to be much higher in previous years. And the school district payments are up $17,000. Expenses budget to budget are up $516,000 or 3.8%. The main drivers are the increases in wages associated, the wages and benefits. Of course, these are the contracts to move folks over to the high deductible plans. Also the costs related to the retirement system. There's additional $10,000 for training for sworn personnel to maintain certification for staff for their own certifications and to become trainers. So again, additional training in the police department. So here's a place where you'll see some training dollars. Proposing a funding $10,000 in improvements to better equip officers for the fitness room, so they can pass the physical fitness requirements certification through the New Hampshire State Standards and Training Office, again, trying to cut down on injuries of our officers, which end up costing us in other ways. I'm including $2,500 for the replacement of 2 mountain bikes. The police chief would like to reactivate the POP unit now that we're back up to staffing levels and getting out there working in the fields with folks, particularly with the homeless population. And $7,000 for training and firearm qualification work. We need to go on a regular basis for training at the police standard and training unit, and to qualify for that, so there's additional costs. We're getting charged for $7,000. And let's see. I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Council Beach.
Yes, if the police chief is on, I'm just curious about recruitment and our ability to recruit young new officers and how that's going, because I know that's a challenge. Was I on?
You are, and I'm just waiting for Chief Osgood to come into the.
Or the manager can answer the question. Doesn't matter, but is that still a challenge?
Actually, we made tremendous progress. And I can report that he's on. I think Brian's just trying to move him in. Let's see if I give you I'd like to give you the numbers.
No, Tom, you can answer that. That's fine. But I know it's been a challenge for a couple of years, so I'm curious about that.
So, Counselor, the number I think about this time last year or thereabouts was about 16 vacancies. I believe we've hired over 20 officers in the past year. My recollection is we're down about four, but that's just a natural churn of retirements, and we have people, getting into the academy and whatnot. So I think we're at an excellent level, and we have a pipeline, and essentially we've changed I know this is a little too deep. We've changed the approach. We used to have regular testing sessions. People would apply. You'd get 100 applications. By the time you get through the whole process, you get down to 3 or 4 who are viable. What we're doing is we're working with individuals on a case-by-case basis, identifying them early, making sure that they're qualified, and then getting them in the academy. But I see Chief Osgood's on now. If he wants to add anything, that I'm glad if he could.
Yeah, thank you. I think you did a very good job explaining that, Mr. Manager. Just in the calendar year 2020, we hired 16 new police officers. 15 of them started in 2020. One started the first week of January. As of payroll today, I think we have 3 vacancies for the rank of police officer. We have 1 offer already that's been accepted, and we probably have another 4 or 5 that we're looking at to send to the August Police Academy. So we should be full up hopefully by mid-July.
That's great news. I'll just add, I spoke with the U.S. Marshal the other day just because he came in and did business, and he had really great things to say about Concord and how professional that department was. And obviously he sees a lot of departments across the state and the nation. So looks like it's working out well. So thank you.
Okay, Council Champlin, you're next.
Yeah, thank you, Your Honor. I had planned on asking about the POP unit and the city manager's news that the chief wants to reinstitute. That is great news to me because that's a very effective, in my unprofessional, non-professional perspective, it's a very effective tool for the department. But I did also want to ask, besides recruiting, how are we doing on retention? Because I remember in past years that's been a kind of a chronic challenge.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Getting back to the POP unit, we had, I think it was about 9 police officers that applied for that position, and we'll be screening those applications this week. We intend to roll out that unit on June 14th. As far as retention is concerned, we did see a couple of retirements during the pandemic, but I think about 55% of our police officers, our sworn police officers, have 0 to 5 years experience. So we have we've done really good at retention over the past year and a half anyway. And so that's really what's brought our staffing levels almost to 100%. So we have the high morale here right now, even through the COVID, and people are doing very well.
That's great news, Chief. Thanks very much. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Council Bouchard.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, Chief. I was looking at City Manager goal 20 from the 2022 goals, goal number 5. And when it speaks to expanding training opportunities for the department's staff, specifically towards focus on the recommendation on the Governor's Commission on Law Enforcement. And some of that training money that you spoke to earlier, City Manager, is any of that training money geared towards that? And if you did mention that, I apologize if I didn't hear it.
I didn't mention that, but it is. But I'd let Chief Osgood if he wants to add into that.
Yeah, so that goal number 5 talks about any of the trainings that would come out of the LEAC Commission, as well as officer wellness, crisis intervention, stress management, mental health first aid, those types of trainings. We do have, or are fortunate to have, a line item general training budget with the police department. So any of the costs borne with some of that advanced training will come out of this line item before we would ask for any supplemental money from the city manager's office.
So just to follow up, so Chief, you are then expecting to do, you have the funds and are expecting to do some training of anything that comes out of that Governor's Commission?
Absolutely. I think if you remember back in the fall of last year, the council approved a grant for us to join a subscription service called Police One Academy. Any of the implicit bias, ethics, and de-escalation trainings, that particular platform has those trainings. The Police Academy Council has approved those classes for us to use. So that's already paid for and available to our officers for those 3 LEAC requirements.
Follow up, Mr. Mayor?
Please.
And Chief, have you started any of those trainings or participated yet online?
Absolutely. The staff has been assigned that through an online portal. The due date for completion of those 6 hours is June 30th. Several officers have already completed the 6 hours and the others are in progress.
Thank you very much.
Councilor Credit.
Your Honor, Chief, I'll probably let you off the hook on this one. I don't mean to repeat this over and over again, except that our police department last year in the community, there was quite a bit of discussion about $1 million increase to the police budget, which of course included equipment as well as anticipated compensation increases across the board for our police department, adding to the force, et cetera. And when I'm looking at the numbers here, I see that while we projected about a $700,000 increase year over year from 2020 to 2021, the projected now is actually only about a $200,000 increase. So that million was compressed quite a bit over the course of the year. And I'm sure that that had a lot to do with the movement. But coming up in 2022, we really are looking at about $1 million increase from 2021 projected to 2022 budgeted. And I'm seeing about $800,000 just in the fringe benefits, which is that retirement plan benefits that again is being passed down to us from the state. Mr. City Manager, can you remind us overall the 2.5% increase that we're looking at for the property taxes for this budgeted year? How much of that was actually going to be retirement plan benefits, dollar-wise, not percentage-wise?
$1.2 million.
So 800,000 alone is coming to the fire department, or rather to the police department. And yet, as you mentioned earlier, a lot of our employees in that department are not actually going to see these benefits. It's what gets paid into the system overall.
It's really that's correct. I think what is primarily, if you think about that number, that increase in number is really 2 large pieces. One is the 3% increase in health insurance costs, and you have a number, 100 employees here, and the increase in the retirement costs for those employees.
Thank you. I appreciate the clarification.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Hawkins.
Thank you. I had a question about some of the language around police department time spent on addressing issues around mental health and substance use disorder. And I'm very thankful that the department spends time, obviously, learning about how to deal with incidents of those nature. But I was curious about this line about educating the community around mental health and around substance use disorder. And I was just curious, does the police department play that? Are they the main ones who play that role at the city level, or do you coordinate with other city staff around that?
So thank you for the question. So, you know, I in my capacity as a chief, I also sit as a on the board of directors at Riverbend, and some of my command staff members sit and work collaboratively with Riverbend on the various programs such as Mobile Crisis, the Doorway, the Choices program, et cetera. The Doorway, Choices. What's the third one? Mobile Crisis. Mobile Crisis, yes. And so we provide education to citizens about how to access resources and services if they don't otherwise know where to go. We're not counselors or licensed clinical social workers, but we steer people in the directions that we think that they need the services.
Follow up?
Please.
Would you say most of that activity happens as you encounter a situation, or are there proactive situations where you're providing that kind of education in the community?
Most of it is done as a first responder level. We also get a lot of calls from family members that would call in to talk about how to access resources for their loved ones. We have done proactive things. I've gone and spoke with support groups at various venues over the last few years. So it's really reactive for the most part as people approach us. And certainly when we're dealing with people that are being taken into our custody for substance use disorder issues, criminal issues, but driven by a substance use disorder, our officers will provide some education as well.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any other hands, Mayor. I do have another question. Should I go ahead and ask it here?
Please.
So I noticed that there's language in here about the unfortunate trend of mass shootings occurring in businesses and schools across the county that's led the police department to conduct 5 active shooter trainings this past year, in addition to other activities. Has the city of Concord used its resources to weigh in on any of the public safety legislation at the State House around the intersection of firearms in our community?
The Concord Police Department, as a municipal police agency, has not. I know that the Chiefs of Police Association, which I'm a member of, I don't know what their position is on a number of these bills, but if they would be the source of law enforcement to weigh in on gun-related bills.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay. That completes police. We'll move to fire.
Okay, you will want to be item number 6. So get out of police, go to item number 6, fire department. And you'll want to be on page 107. And if you thought police was exciting, revenues budget to budget are up $6,500 or less than 0.5%. And that's mainly due to an increase in fire prevention permits, which are up $6,200. Ambulance fees charges are level budgeted for fiscal year 22. For expenses, budget to budget are up $827,000 or 5.8%. And this is due to contractual increases in wages and benefits, and of course, the retirement costs. So you recall that we just finished a contract with the fire officers. So all unions are under contract. Fire officers are now under contract. So we've actually moved everybody to the high deductible plan. Please note that I'm also proposing funding in the budget for training for the lead dispatchers and supervisors on ArcGIS knowledge for map data and address validation for $3,750. That's really for our dispatch folks. We have UTV maintenance, our all-terrain vehicle that goes out particularly on the trail work and for different brush fires and repairs. So we're going to need dollars for that. So there's $1,000 additional for that. There's operating funds for the new training ground facilities, which is now complete, and we need to be able to have dollars to operate that. It's $4,800. $2,400 for cell phone stipends for battalion chiefs. So getting away from having buying individual cell phones for them and actually giving stipends, which is savings for us. And membership to the American Ambulance Association for $1,400. We believe there's a lot to learn from them. So we'd like to add that, and I'd be glad to answer any questions. Those are the changes.
Who has questions for the manager? Councilor Creditor.
This question was posed to me. In regards to someone calls 911, they have a medical emergency, and what's dispatched to that site is a police officer and not an ambulance, not a paramedic, not anyone from the fire department. The second portion that was raised is there are times when you call 911 and it's a medical emergency and the police show up and a fire truck shows up and an ambulance shows up. How is it that these are decided for what is dispatched to an emergency? Why would someone have a medical emergency that an ambulance would not respond? Why would there be a situation where the police show up and other fire apparatus and personnel? What is the disparity? How are those decisions made? And what is that ultimately costing us in our community? If you could help understand that and explain that for our residents, that would be awesome.
It'd be awesome if I could understand. I asked Sean Brown to come in, the fire chief.
Yes, good evening, Councilor Kretovic, Mr. Manager, Mr. Mayor. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you for the question, Councilor. So here in the city of Concord, our calls initially come in through the enhanced 911 system that's operated through the state of New Hampshire. They use what's referred to as call coding, and they essentially start the triage process for the incident by asking a series of questions, and based on the initial responses to the questions, adjust the level of response to the incident. So for your first question, why might a police officer show up first? And that would be because there was indication potentially of a violent person or some type of active threat that needed to be secured prior to the fire department going in. So we would still respond. We might stage possibly just around the corner, a block away, and wait to hear word from the PD that the scene is clear to go in. And occasionally what we find out is that there isn't actually even a medical emergency. So we may get cleared by PD without actually ever making it to the scene. But more often than not, if we're called, PD is going to secure the scene, then have us come in just to make sure everything's okay. So that's the first scenario. The additional scenarios, again, go back to call coding, and the calls run from alpha level, which is the least severe, if you will, up through echo, which is the most severe. So it's alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, echo. An alpha level call will typically just get an ambulance response, possibly without even any lights and sirens, because it's determined not to be that high level of a risk based on the algorithms. And these are nationally accepted and adopted algorithms, these questions that New Hampshire 911 uses. It may be something that's more severe, the delta echo level, breathing difficulties, cardiac arrest, things of that nature that require all of the folks that respond, the paramedic and either the EMT or other paramedic that's on the ambulance, as well as the EMS personnel that are on the fire apparatus. All of our folks in the fire department are either EMTs, advanced EMTs, or paramedics. So they will respond, assist with the advanced life support that's typically required from those levels of calls. They may accompany the ambulance to the hospital, or they may assist with just stabilizing the patient, loading the patient into the ambulance, and then the ambulance will transport, and the engine will go in service and make themselves available for calls. Does that answer your questions, Counselor?
It does, with great detail, and I really appreciate it because it seems to make sense. It seemed like there would be a scientific reason on how this all happens, but then it was just kind of like mojo. I wasn't sure, so I asked. Thank you.
And if I could jump back just one moment as well, is that occasionally, even on the alpha level calls, if there's not an ambulance close by, the closest unit will still go. So if the ambulance is out of district, coming from the hospital, or where we need a mutual aid ambulance, the closest fire unit will go and just start that basic first aid or care.
Thank you. Councilor Fennessy.
Thank you, Chief. I got a data question for you that I've been asked by a constituent. When we see the number of calls that the fire department has to respond to, is that just based on the department as a whole, or, for example, if multiple vehicles respond to a call, are each of those counted as a call for purposes of collecting that information?
No, sir. Every incident gets an incident number. And for instance, one of the larger incidents we had recently is the fire over on Merrimack Street downtown that went to 4 alarms. A dozen communities responded, all of our apparatus, our reserve apparatus with callback personnel. That only gets one call, one incident.
Okay.
Thank you.
Gotcha. Anyone else have questions for the chief while he's here? Councilor Mattson.
Thank you, Your Honor. Chief, could you give some information relative to the amount of time? You know, you guys do a lot of training and research, and you also discuss when you send out the ambulances. Well, let me back up. When you spoke about the Manchester event and there were multiple people involved, what occurs when all of your units are used? Where does our help come from other parts of the city?
Well, that would depend. Sometimes we call in off-duty personnel, and then sometimes we use mutual aid. For instance, just during this meeting, we have companies out of town mutual aid at a building fire. We have all of our ambulances tied up, and we have Bo, as we speak, in the city at a medical call, providing us mutual aid. So it's kind of a typical day for us right now.
Follow up, Your Honor.
Please.
How many communities mutual aid with us directly?
We have 23 communities in our mutual aid compact. So that's who we dispatch for and who we might receive aid from. We also will occasionally receive aid from outside of the mutual aid compact. Again, referring back just because it's one of the more recent incidents, the Merrimack Street fire, we had Goffstown in the city, we had Manchester in the city, we had Tilton Northfield in the city, and none of those communities, those are just a few that I can recall off the top of my head that are not in our mutual aid compact, but actually responded into the city.
Thank you.
Councilor Keach. Councilor Keach, if you could take yourself off mute. please.
Thank you. Sorry. So going back to mutual aid, I've always had a question about that and whether it's equitable to Concord. And obviously it's of help, but it seems to be a little bit unbalanced. So, I mean, it's just more of a question to throw out there, and I don't expect an answer, but I think that should be looked at some level.
We do, I have 2020, this is just the EMS incidents for calendar year 2020, again, because that's complete. I can run fiscal year information, but it would not be complete for FY21. So for calendar year 2020, we went out mutual aid just for the EMS 194 times, and we received mutual aid 114 times. So just to kind of give, so slight disparity there, but we definitely call on mutual aid as well as give it.
Great. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Anyone else? Chief, I had a question. It kind of goes along a few different lines. One is the mutual aid piece, but it's also kind of reflective in Council Fenix's questions in terms of the number of calls that just seem to be increasing. And, you know, I've done a few of these budgets, and, you know, we generally have the same amount of personnel that we've had for many years now. And I'm going to get to the question by way of this. I just want to say thank you for your work with our PIO. I think that it's been tremendously beneficial to the community to see all that is going on and what you've been doing. So I appreciate that. The communication that you have made effort to do for the community, I think it's been helpful. But sometimes it doesn't always paint the picture of what's going on. And I know that recently, for instance, there was a fire, I believe, at the Smoke Show restaurant. But at the same time, what else was going on in the city and with the department? Perhaps you kind of use that as an example.
Yeah, sure. A couple things, if I may, Mr. Mayor. First off, I appreciate you recognizing the work that Stephanie Breton has done. She's been an incredible help. You know, we have had an incredibly busy year. COVID has caused some real interesting experiences for us, but a lot of that stuff has not been anything that's out of the ordinary for the types of calls. It's just that with Stephanie's assistance, we've really been just letting the community know what it is that we're doing for them and what their tax dollars are going to work to do. So I appreciate you. I appreciate you recognizing that. And to that point, she assisted us with a post on social media recently, and that particular Tuesday, we did a social media post on that, and there was a fire in Dunbarton, 2-alarm fire. So we had a couple companies out of town in Dunbarton. At the same time, a fire came in at Smoke Show restaurant down on Fort Eddy Road. It wasn't a large fire, but it was extending into the building. The folks did phenomenal quick work to prevent the spread throughout that occupancy. But just as they were rolling in directly across the street in the parking lot of Market Basket, a medical aid request came in for a CPR in progress. It was an overdose. And we were able to grab one person off of that wasn't committed to the Smoke Show incident, and he and I actually went across the street to the medical aid call, and eventually Incident Commander was able to free up some resources to get them over there to transport that patient. The patient survived. Interestingly enough, probably about 20 minutes after that, at the same plaza at Market Basket, a homeless individual that lives behind Lowe's, who regularly pulls the fire alarm box at the Market Basket when he needs medical aid, pulled the fire alarm box. But we went over there again, pulled some resources off the Smoke Show fire, went over there to see what was going on, and it turns out it was this individual who was pulled the box to summon medical aid. Interestingly enough, if I may, a side note to that is that same individual just this past Friday night, who lives behind Lowe's, his campfire got out of control, spread to an area about 75 feet by 30 feet, actually trapped him between the flames and a fence. And our crews actually saved him, certainly saved him from being seriously burned and potentially saved his life just a few nights after that other incident. So, yeah, so that's kind of the story behind the story on that post that you might have saw on the Facebook page.
I appreciate sharing that because it seems like that is more the norm than anything these days.
It is, yeah. You're correct, sir. And as I indicated earlier to one of the other questions during this meeting, we're at one overdose, another drug-related call. All of our ambulances were tied up. We had mutual aid in the city, and we had sent mutual aid out of the city, all during the span of this meeting tonight.
And how many more personnel have you added in the past 10 years?
Compared to 2021, we have no additional personnel. We have about almost 3,000 more runs per year, but it's the same number of personnel as 2021.
Thank you, Chief. Anyone else have questions?
Yeah, 2001. I apologize about that.
Anyone else? All right. Thank you, Chief. Appreciate it. Mr. Manager, we're going to take us to general services.
Certainly. Before we go there, I'd just like to, Stephanie, as has been said previously, Stephanie Breton has done a fabulous job with a lot of this public information. But I'd like to thank Councilor Grady Sexton for her advice on a lot of this, because she's been great about giving us ideas on how to get information out there. So just wanted to pass that on. You'll want to be on page, let's see, for general services, item number 7. So you have to get out of the fire department, go back to the agenda. Item number 7, general services. And you want to be on page 110. And on page 110, I'll let you get there. Revenues budget to budget are up $18,700 or 2%, which is mainly due to transfers in from other funds. And expenses budget to budget are up $278,000 or 2.8%, and are mainly related to the wages for the contracts and the retirement cost increases. Outside services is also up $42,000. And that's due to, you'll see it actually, if you've been out driving around, road striping is now taking place from our contractors. That road striping cost has increased from 0.043 cents a linear foot to 0.052 cents a linear foot, or $18,300. So essentially to stripe the same amount of road mileage is an additional $18,300 this coming year. Communications is up $5,000 for our costs. A number of proposed program change requests. So these are requests from the departments. We've included $5,000 for Main Street light post repair. So you recall for the downtown improvement project, we own those light posts. So if there's an accident or something happens, sure, we collect insurance, but the repairs are ours for those light posts. We're adding $5,000 to be able to put light posts back up. We've contracted electrical services for $1,200. We've increased that number. HVAC and coil cleaning. So part of our inspections due to COVID and making sure our air maintenance and handling systems are adequate. So $7,500 for the buildings throughout the city. We have up at the combined operation maintenance facility, we have an oil sump and drain maintenance. We have to spend about $2,500 up there to make sure we're doing the environmentally appropriate work. And there's an increase of $4,300 for municipal complex to increase costs for ground maintenance. I'm also proposing a labor grade adjustment for the general services division heads. So this is, your water superintendent, your wastewater superintendent. We find that we're not quite where we should be with those wages. So if you put all of those together, that's about $29,400, which would be the cost for the wages and for all the ancillary benefit costs that go along with that. And then also included on the general services are 2 supplemental reports. So if you go over to page 111, this just breaks down those numbers in a little bit different way. These aren't additional costs. It's just a different way of looking at them. The first section is for downtown services, and that shows the costs associated with the downtown services program. The FY22 budget shows an increase of $18,000. That's mainly due to wages and benefits and the retirement costs. And again, that $5,000, not an additional $5,000, the same $5,000 for the Main Street lights post repairs, because that's where the work will be done. The second supplemental piece, the way the councils wanted to look at it in the past, is what are we actually paying for snow and ice control? And this budget's up $50,000. This includes the wages and benefit costs and retirement costs, but also an increase in supply costs, the salt and sand, for $4,200. And I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Those questions. Councilor Todd.
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. Not so much a question here, really, but just a comment, which I think we've heard already, but I wanted to chime in. I've heard from several residents who, either using the Citizens Tracker or the Click Fix app, were very pleased with the results, especially the timeliness of the requests. So, for example, one person wrote to me and said that she had used the app. She put in a complaint about a pothole near her driveway, and she said the next day she came back from work, it was fixed. So, that kind of level of service is really to be commended. And I've noticed that on several other occasions myself personally when I put in requests, and also, as I say, what I've heard from constituents. So just kudos to the General Services Department and the way they're handling these claims efficiently, and the requests are really being taken care of rapidly. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilor Madsen.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'm not sure if this might be specific more to Mr. Chesley, but if you can answer it, Mr. Spell, that would be great. I've been getting some questions from constituents relative to 2 items, basically plowing and paving specifically, but I'm going to go with the plowing question first. Is there a system by which we heard earlier about fire, how they rate, their calls in, and then how they process them and address them, et cetera. Is there some sort of similar system with respect to plowing? There have been a couple of claims that they're the last street that gets plowed. I kind of wonder if I wonder if it's possible that they are, or does that rotate? Like we talked about leaves before, where they start from different ends of the city.
I thought my street was the last street to be plowed, but
I've heard multiple.
Yeah, I think Councilor Chip Chesley would be able to, General Service Director, would be able to answer this best.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. On our web, we have published our winter operations maintenance policy. That's there for all to see. It's a little clunky, I'll say that, but when you get through it, we basically prioritize which streets should be plowed first. We were talking earlier tonight to our emergency services department in streets that carry a high level of traffic, streets that are service a hospital, out of necessity need to receive a higher level of service. And then as we get down further into the street network, you get to your local neighborhood streets, and then possibly the dead-end streets are probably falling lower in priority just because of the volume of traffic that they receive.
Okay.
And that's basically how it's done every storm.
Thank you. Follow up, Your Honor?
Please.
Just to a point for that is, it is not necessarily the same streets that end up being, quote, the last street? Is there some sort of rotation or however that works? When you get down to the dead ends and the lower volume streets I'm talking about, it makes sense, obviously, with what else you said.
Right, I think for every storm, there is probably the last street that we reached. So I suspect we had 27 storms last year we responded to, and I suspect there are 27 streets, all different, that may have been the last that may have been reached.
Thank you.
It's facetious, but it's not like Tom Street one, Mayor Street next time, this street next time. It's all how the storm plays out.
Thank you. The second question basically is about paving, and I've had a lot of questions about paving lately, and I probably will be talking to you about some specific ones. But in general, part of this is, what is the ideal of the paving rotation that we're looking for? If in an ideal situation, what would be that rotation timeframe?
In an ideal situation, we've developed a pavement management plan that's predicated on a road's life that has about 25 years.
Okay.
That said, excuse me, there are streets that we have probably not paved for well over 25 years because right now we are in a catch-up mode, so to speak.
Yes, I'm aware of that. Some of the constituent concerns basically have been with respect to roads that haven't been paved for nearly 40 years, and then they are being more or less having checked into their situation, finding out that it might be another 10, and there's some serious concerns with that. But one of the things that I've been discussing with them, and we'll go into further detail with you offline, but the idea is of the ranking system for paving, and relative to it's not that the 10-year time frame that you're talking about is sort of a placeholder, just like we put placeholders in for our budget. But the comment really is that you do go out and review these streets, and rankings can change. Can you go through that just a little bit for us?
Sure. Every 2 years, we go out and we objectively have interns survey the streets. They rank them. There's a methodology. They take a look at the number of cracks, type of delineation that may be occurring on the street, types of pavement deformation that may be coming on the streets. And every street is given a ranking, and that's what we use to start to sort which streets should be addressed first and which streets should fall to the bottom. Other parts of that ranking process would be if a major arterial street that carries along the traffic is starting to fall apart, we may put money in to maintain it. Whereas if you had a local street that only served 2 or 3 houses, had very low traffic demand, it may not score as high, make it prorated that way. But we look at streets every 2 years, and they change because some of them fall apart quicker than others. So, and what we see right now, we tell someone in maybe 5, 6, 8 years. That's based upon the information we have right now. We may go out in a year or so from now, take another snapshot and say, no, that's gonna change. So it's a dynamic process. Is one thing we need to keep in mind.
Thank you.
So, credit.
Just to follow up on the thoughts of Councilor Mattson, I have had a lot of recent inquiries about paving, and I don't want to go into them in detail this evening because we'll talk about them during the capital improvement program. Just want to give you a heads up that there's more to come on this topic.
Thank you.
Ms. Manager.
Just to throw another variable into the equation. Remember, too, you have utility lines running under all these streets. So some are owned by the city, and the water and wastewater, we synchronize them with the paving program. So you don't want to go out and put a utility line. Let's say a water line 75 years old, starting to have problems with it. You want to replace it, and at the same time you replace the road. You don't want to put a new road out there, come back 10 years later, and have to rip it back up and then pave it again. So, and then of course you have Liberty Utilities and others out there digging into the roads because they're doing gas line extensions or gas line improvements or changes. And then so that will cause deterioration of the roads, which we collect fees for. But that causes roads to deteriorate even faster versus if you had a nice clean surface that wasn't cut. So again, that's why you got to do the analysis every 2 years.
Councilman Bouchard, did you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was just going to just emphasize, as the city manager said about just striping, increasing 18,000 a mile. I think as we see cost increase on asphalt and any construction work, that we're going to have to make really hard choices on just how much paving we can realistically do. And we just might get further behind or really have to bump up that budget more with more dollars than we anticipated 2 years ago. So that's it.
Anyone else? I just had a couple of quick questions. In terms of the road striping, you said you increased it by 18,300, I think. That's not contracted. That would be stuff we do internally. Is that correct? Or is that contracted?
I think Chip's going to do this one, but let me start. So the long striping, so you picture the fog lines and the yellow lines, that's all contracted work. The stop bars, the arrows, parking spaces, that's us. Did I get that right, Chip?
Absolutely. And we went out to bid for the long line, and the contract came in at a higher price, and that's what we're seeing.
Okay, so the increase in money for road striping, those are the long lines then?
Yes.
What's the cycle to to do some of the sidewalks and some of the shorter stuff, the stop bars and those type of things?
What we try to do is we do crosswalks and stop bars are the first priority. And after that, we come in and once we get those in place, we'll start putting down arrows and directional things. And then once that's completed, then we move into parking and other striping that we may be doing.
Okay. Let me just say, I think the folks that we have do a real nice job, but I would just suggest that during the school year, obviously, it's real important as people, particularly I suspect next year, we see more and more of the kids going back to school to focus on those school areas. But recently, I've noticed that the Main Street, for instance, the lines that delineate the crosswalks have completely faded. And where the brick used to stand out on Main Street, and you could really, if you're a driver, you could notice the sidewalk real quickly. But it's really all kind of blended together now. And the bump out's clearly a help to identify where those crosswalks are. But do you anticipate getting, just for pure safety purposes of people crossing Main, getting out there sooner than later, or is that something that won't be around for a while?
I think, yeah, all crosswalks we try to get to as soon as we can, Mayor. Most of the work is done at night. What may push us back is we got a rainy spell. We can't paint in the rain, but we're out painting those, not those particular crosswalks. That's the effort that we're undertaking right now.
I guess my point was not all sidewalks are created equal. How's that?
Understood.
I think the higher use kids are probably a priority. That was one question. The second is, do you have, I suspect you use our GIS system, but do you have a good inventory of all of our assets that you manage? Because when you start to consider the number of signs and all the other things, lights, street lights, when we really start thinking about it, we have a lot of assets out there in the streets and such. Do you have a way of inventory of those so that we know what we have and when it needs to be replaced?
We do. There is on our GIS system, there is a layer that identifies our street signs. We have well over 10,000 street signs in the city. So
Are
that's
there 5,000 of them in the garages?
no, I think these are on.
That was from Mr. Walsh, by the way, if he's listening.
Yeah, I understood. But there are well over 3,000 parking signs, so I guess Matt's got to share those. Okay, but there's well over 10,000 street signs in the city, and that includes delineators as well. So there's a good amount out there.
So with that, I think you're hearing tonight some of the concern around the paving program, and obviously that's up to us, and it's about the availability of dollars, and I understand that. But every 2 years seems like a long time to do that assessment. And when we went through just the general government section of the budget, I mean, I think I counted at least 4 different IT contracts, that we are pursuing. There's technology that exists now that really does measure our inventory, and I wonder, have you ever considered using the advancement technology we have now to go out there and to measure the quality of those roads, other than just having somebody drive around? I mean, I think most of us will use our phones to, get around, and you can do 3D, and you can check out your house on Google Maps or whatever the heck map you use. Do we use technology? Have you ever considered that?
I think this department, Your Honor, probably uses technology more than most other public works agencies in the state. So I think we highly leverage technology.
Well, let me be more specific. Do you use it to measure the condition of roads?
Ultimately, to measure the condition of the roads, it ultimately is going to require a person's observation, and then that data is distilled through technology, and roads are then rated. So yes, we do. But ultimately, you need someone needs to grade the road. You need eyes and boots on the ground.
Interesting. Okay, I'll stop. Council Boucher.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just following up on the comment that not all sidewalks and crosswalks are created equal. And I was just wondering, the Loudon Road crosswalks and sidewalks, especially the crosswalks at the 5 pedestrian lights, I would hope that they would be a priority also.
Good point. Anyone else have questions? I had one more. So my very first constituent request when I was first elected from Ward 10 was dealing with a street light. And interestingly, I have a streetlight question that was posed to me just about a week or so ago. It's my understanding that there was an accident that occurred on Shaman Street where a car went right through a fence as it was kind of heading down towards the circle or roundabout. And about 2 years ago, a streetlight disappeared that was in that area. And I think one of the concerns from some of the people who live in that area, as well as anybody who's driven it lately, it becomes very, very dark without that streetlight there. My question is, when I was told years ago that the only way you get a streetlight is if you take it from some other place, my question was, where did that streetlight go? That was there on Shaman Street about 2 years ago, was removed, and how do we get it back?
That's a good question. Streetlights isn't really part of our jurisdiction, Your Honor. I will call engineering tomorrow morning and inquire. But they're the king of streetlights in the city.
All right, I'll check with Mr. Baye. No problem. Anyone else have questions? Okay, appreciate that. Mr. Manager, where would you like to take us now?
Could I take you back to IT and Council Fennessy's question?
Sure.
So this is for outside. He had a question regarding outside services. So for fiscal year 22, the increase, there's 2 parts to the question. What was the increase? The increase was camera maintenance. As you know, we have cameras throughout the city, particularly in the garages. The C-click fix costs, because there's obviously costs for that. and web conferencing software, so WebEx and Zoom costs. That's all now being budgeted. So that's there. So why is it lower in fiscal year 21? We saved, we meaning Eddie and Jonathan saved $10,000 on maintenance when they replaced the firewall out of the life cycle. So they're able to do that early and save $10,000. They had 2 college reimbursements that were not taken from our staff because they weren't able to do them based on their schedule. So that funding wasn't spent. And the latest software upgrades were postponed. We're waiting to see the impact of the unexpected COVID costs. So we delayed those, and we'll have to pick those up. So that's why those dollars were unexpended. I believe that answers Councilor Fennessy's question. And I
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. And I think that takes us to the end of the evening.
Wonderful. Does anybody have anything before we part ways? Okay, not seeing anything. Then I would simply remind everyone that we will be meeting again on Thursday. We start again at 5:30. And concluding our Finance Committee, we have noticed a meeting of the City Council. The purpose of that meeting, as you all remember, we are going to be discussing the future of masks in the city. I believe there will also be a meeting with our attorney following that discussion. So just for timing purposes, you may want to have a spring snack with you. Mr. Manager?
Councilor Fennessy asked a question about vaccination rates. So the chief provided those. So if you'd like, I can give you those numbers right now so you can process them before Thursday. So officially, Concord has a number. This is with Department of Safety, Health and Safety. 43,352 people. So that's our official number, 43,352. Of those, 27,866, or 64%, have received 1 or more doses, and 23,288, or 54%, are fully vaccinated. That's what we have for our numbers.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. That's all I have, sir.
Does anybody have anything else for the council? Okay, seeing none. Everyone have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you all Thursday. Thanks, everyone. Be safe.